So today, children, I want to talk about Doreen Valiente, the mother of modern witchcraft. The spy who worshipped the moon and never quite came in from the cold. The sharp researcher who spotted forgeries and accidentally helped create a religion, though she thought organized religion was a curse to humanity, and wrote beautiful books of poems and spells about how to draw down the moon and how to find your own magic alone with the trees.
You aren't being a proper woman, therefore you must be a witch. You must be a witch.
Doreen was a high priestess, working closely with men whose names would come to be famously associated with Wicca. Gardnerian Wicca, Cochrane's Craft. Then there's tall, nerdy, humble, badass Doreen, in the middle of a bunch of middle-aged, oddly conservative nudists with their magical rulebooks copy-pasting Crowleyisms onto co-masonry and Golden Dawn stuff and claiming they descend from a secret hereditary coven. There's Doreen. She'd politely and firmly gather and organize and excise and write spells that offer solace and magic to hundreds and thousands of people still today. Most of the stories I'll reference in this episode come from Philip Heselton's friendly and thorough and delightfully weird biography entitled Doreen Valiente, Witch, and also from George Knoll's biography online. And as usual, we'll link to all our sources on our website, missingwitches.com, and we'll try to do our best with a beloved figure, and as usual, just try to learn something and not fuck it all up. Doreen Valiente's most important contribution, the piece of writing that became a touchstone for a re-emergent pagan faith practice and core to Wiccan liturgy, is the Charge of the Goddess. So let's call it out in full to this circle. Because we are a circle. You and you and you and I, joined in the digital dark, sounds looping us between our ears. Take your mind's eye out to the wild. We go together below a full moon, by the woods, by the sea. We are there with Doreen. Listen to the words of the Great Mother, who was of old also called Artemis, Astarte, Diana, Melusine, Aphrodite, Ceridwen, Dana, Arianrod, Isis, Bride, and by many other names. Whenever ye have need of anything once in a month, and better it be when the moon is full, then ye shall assemble in some secret place and adore the spirit of me, who am queen of all witcheries. There shall ye assemble, ye who are fain to learn all sorcery, yet have not yet won its deepest secrets. To these I will teach things that are yet unknown. And ye shall be free from slavery. And as a sign that ye are really free, ye shall be naked in your rights, and ye shall dance, sing, feast, make music, and love, all in my praise. For mine is the ecstasy of the Spirit, and mine is also joy on earth. For my law is love unto all beings. Keep pure your highest ideal. Strive ever toward it. Let not stop you or turn you aside. For mine is the secret door which opens upon the land of youth. And mine is the cup of the wine of life, and the cauldron of Ceridwen, which is the holy grail of immortality. I am the gracious goddess, who gives the gift of joy unto the heart. Upon earth I give the knowledge of the Spirit eternal, and beyond death I give peace and freedom and reunion with those who have gone before. Nor do I demand sacrifice, for behold, I am the mother of all living, and my love is poured out upon the earth. Hear ye the words of the star goddess, she in the dust of whose feet are the hosts of heaven, whose body encircleth the universe. I, who am the beauty of the green earth, and the white moon among the stars, and the mystery of the waters, and the heart's desire, call unto thy soul, arise and come unto me. For I am the soul of nature, who giveth life to the universe. From me all things proceed, and unto me must all things return. And before my face, beloved of gods and mortals, thine inmost divine self shall be unfolded in the rapture of infinite joy. Let my worship be within the heart that rejoiceth, for behold, all acts of love and pleasure are my rituals. And therefore let there be beauty and strength, power and compassion, honor and humility, mirth and reverence within you. And thou who thinkest to seek for me, know thy seeking and yearning shall avail thee not unless thou know this mystery, that if that which thou seekest thou findest not within thee, thou wilt never find it without thee. For behold, I have been with thee from the beginning, and I am that which is attained at the end of desire. Where did this liturgy come from? It was created in response to a challenge by Gerald Gardner, and it came from her own decades of research and her own poetic skill and her lifelong deep intuition and connection with the moon and what she saw behind it, something that was very real and very potent. I saw the world of force behind the world of form. But let's step back, because before Doreen joined a coven and began to take her childhood talent for improvised spell work into the role of priestess writing liturgy, she was gathering books, gathering magical friends, gathering her powers. And before that, Doreen was a secret codebreaker and World War II spy alongside the other math witch women of Bletchley Park. She was smart, serious, and aware that there are layers of hidden knowledge in the world, and excellent at keeping secrets. 2 minutes on Bletchley Park, if you're unfamiliar. Bletchley Park was the central site for British codebreakers during World War II, though at the time this was a closely guarded secret. During the Second World War, the Bletchley Park estate housed the British government Code and Cipher School, which regularly penetrated the secret communications of the Axis powers, most importantly the German Enigma and Lorenz ciphers. Among its most notable early personnel was Alan Turing. According to the official historian of British intelligence, the ultra-intelligence produced at Bletchley shortened the war by 2 to 4 years, and without it, the outcome of the war would have been uncertain. In January 1945, at the peak of code-breaking efforts, some 10,000 personnel were working at Bletchley and its outstations, and about 3/4 of these were women. Many of the women came from middle-class backgrounds and held degrees in mathematics, physics, and engineering. Based on the information that Doreen had seemed to know all about the first computer, Colossus, Bletchley Park, and the Enigma machine, her biographer checked the now unclassified records at Bletchley Park and discovered that she had indeed worked there as Foreign Office Civilian Temporary Senior Assistant Officer and a translator. Not much is known of her time at Bletchley Park, or if she continued to do work for the Secret Service after ostensibly leaving. Her biographer points out that some choices she makes that seem inconsistent with the rest of her ethic and path suggest these too might have been part of a role she was playing. As Sarah Waldron wrote in an article about Valiente for Broadly.com, Valiente was pro-contraception, pro-choice, interested in feminism and sexual liberation, and was anti-racism and anti-homophobia long before that was common. So it's a surprise to learn that she joined the ultra-right-wing National Front in 1973. She was briefly involved with the Northern League, a neo-Nazi group whose ideology was utterly at odds with her strongly held beliefs. Valiente had spent a world war fighting against fascists. After 18 months, she let her membership in these organizations lapse. Theories abound. Doreen Valiente was a natural pragmatist, adept at negotiating dodgy dealings and with a head for meticulous research. She wasn't a fascist. One accepted theory is that she thought that these groups, still in relative infancy, might legitimize paganism through patriotism. Another theory was that she was still working for the government, spying on fascists who were unlikely to suspect a middle-aged woman, but Hutton accepts that no proof of this is forthcoming. This is an unavoidable and disappointing 1.5 years in Doreen's later life, and I wanted to include it early because it's ugly and it's true, and I don't know what to do with it. Her biographer, Philip Heselton, writes, "What was going on? Why would someone who had devoted years of her life during the war to combating fascism want to join organizations like the Northern League and the National Front? I think by the time she joined the Northern League, she was well aware of what its policies were, and that her instinct as an investigator took over. It was the same, I believe, as with Charles Cardell. She said, I kept on friendly terms with Cardell in order to see what he was up to." That, certainly for the latter part of her membership of the National Front, her attitude was one of investigation rather than enthusiastic support, is confirmed by what she wrote to Janet and Stuart Farrar about extreme right-wing involvement in occultism. Now it so happens I have done some investigation into this myself in the past, and believe me, there is nothing mythical about it. Fascism is alive and sick and living in Europe and Britain. I like this interpretation, and I think it jives with the facts, but we just don't know. And like many other white European mid-century foundational figures, she said some things about race that are pretty questionable today. She said she did not object to racial mixing, which she called revitalizing, provided it did not result in a dull, materialistic sameness in which the traditions of both races are blurred and lost, which is not good for either race. And she refers to what is called the theory of positive racialism, which postulates that every race has something to contribute contribute to the good of humanity as a whole, some purpose to fulfill. She wrote, "This may be what the old religion has needed, namely to tell people that they are not only orphaned of the Great Mother, Earth, or nature, but also cut off from the group soul of their race, and that they need the community of blood and soil in order to find again their health of body and soul." We can get behind this only to the extent that she doesn't seem to support the preservation of only the white race, but as she states, of all races. Difference is good, but reading this from a contemporary standpoint, it's scary to think of each race having a singular purpose, because honestly, that's how you get slavery. We know the American ideal of the melting pot that strips away difference and demands assimilation is hurtful, violence. So we're willing to give Doreen the benefit of the doubt. Remember, whether we buy that her association with the National Front was purely investigative or not, I mean, it's not like she could have known the enemy by following them on Twitter. Her takeaway was that fascism is sick. And we see a lot of this in modern witchcraft's conversations about appropriation, that it's good to investigate your own ancestors, but to know that our one common ancestor is this earth. And because we know of her history as a spy, her own characterization of her time with the National Front as investigation, and because she spent such a short time in this realm, we're willing to accept, for now, that her intentions were honest and without malice. Valiente was reading and collecting material on magic and witchcraft, including a private collection of books from an OTO adherent, more on this branch of the Golden Dawn in the Lady Frida Harris episode, when she stumbled on news of Gardner's Circle. In 1952, Doreen read an article in the weekly magazine Illustrated entitled "Witchcraft in Britain," which mentioned a southern coven of British witches which had performed a ritual in the New Forest in 1940 to try and stop the threatened invasion of Britain. She contacted the author, told him of her occult studies, and asked to be put in touch with what the article had called the witch cult. Her letter was passed on to Gerald Gardner, who had been initiated as a witch in the New Forest in 1939. After corresponding back and forth for a while, Doreen expressed her interest in joining the coven. Gardner invited Doreen to tea at a friend's house near the New Forest. During the summer of 1952, in a little town called Christchurch, Hampshire, there still lived a lady called Defoe, the very same lady who had introduced Gardner to the New Forest Coven in the autumn of 39. She used Defoe as a pseudonym because only a year before, the old Witchcraft Act of 1735 had been repealed, and technically witchcraft was still considered by many a criminal offense. To declare oneself a witch could bring about all sorts of social complications. At this first meeting in Defoe's home, Gardner, of whom Doreen says, "One felt he had seen far horizons and encountered strange things," didn't invite her to join his coven, but presented Doreen with a copy of his book, High Magic's Aid. This he did to all potential initiates in order to gauge their reactions to ritual nudity and scourging. After further correspondence, a year later, in 1953, Doreen received her first degree initiation into the craft. Tradition demanded that an opposite member of sex conduct the initiation, and so Gardner decided to conduct it himself. On Midsummer's Eve, he was due to attend a Druid solstice gathering at Stonehenge, where he was to loan the order his ritual sword. Traveling in from his witchcraft museum on the Isle of Man, on his way, he stopped off at the home of Defoe to initiate Doreen. That evening, Doreen was reborn as Ameth, the pseudonym, or craft name as it is called, by which she was to be known. During the initiation, Gardner used his own Book of Shadows, containing, as he claimed, information and remnants of rites taken from an old religion passed down through the ages to the old New Forest Coven. But from it he also read a passage Doreen instantly recognized. It came not from an old religion, but from a more contemporary source, the Gnostic Mass, written by Aleister Crowley. Doreen said, "I told Gerald afterwards, I think he was none too pleased at my recognition of his source." But Gerald then gave Doreen free access to his Book of Shadows and other materials he'd collected. He still claimed most had been passed down from an old coven, but much of it was fragmentary. So working in collaboration with Gardner, she began to rewrite his Book of Shadow. This revised version of the book served as the basis for what was to become known as Gardnerian Wicca, which still today is one of the most dominant traditions of contemporary witchcraft. But by 1957, a rift was starting to form between Gardner, Doreen, and the rest of his coven. It was caused mainly by his relentless pursuit of publicity, and would lead Doreen and others to leave his coven. There are a couple different stories about what precipitates her eventual break with Gardner, and sends members of that circle spiraling out to create their own covens like dandelion seeds, in the poetic way she would see it all making sense when she looked back later. The stories that resonate most for me of why she may have needed to leave involve an unfortunate and unsurprising bit of misogyny. Since meetings could last until fairly late, members without cars or with long distances to cover, like Doreen, slept in a hut neighboring the witch's cottage. Gerald liked to cuddle up with whoever had been his high priestess. He was too old to engage in penetrative sex, but would have enjoyed affectionate caresses. Doreen was not opposed to all acts of love and pleasure, as we know by having written The Charge of the Goddess, but she did apparently find these cuddles from Gerald embarrassing. Oh gosh, okay, and then I'm just going to tell you the story really quick. So she's not around one day for a coven meeting, and he knows she's not going to be around, and he chooses that day to have 2 new members initiated, and it's sort of weird. The rest of the members of the coven are like, why are you doing it when the high priestess isn't here? Normally she would be the one to do it. It seems like you're kind of sneaking some new cute folks in the back door. It's like sexy young couple. And so then she comes back and she's like, oh, cool, we have new members. Well, let's talk about it. And, maybe we should have like a rule book or something that says like, we don't bring in new people without us all talking about it first. Like maybe something like that would be good for our coven. And he was like, oh no, don't worry. We don't need a rule book. I have this ancient rule book. And it was passed down to me. And look at it. It's got the laws of witchcraft in it. And there's a page, one of the laws on the first page read, and the greatest virtue of a high priestess is that she recognizes that youth is necessary to the representation of the goddess. So she will retire gracefully in favor of a younger woman, should the coven so decide in council. It struck Doreen that this whole exercise was just a way to get rid of her. And she tells of her own reactions to seeing the laws. We were apparently supposed to be overawed. Our actual reaction was to be extremely skeptical. None of us had ever set eyes on these alleged laws before, though we noticed that they incorporated a preliminary passage from the Book of Shadows, commencing, "Keep a book in your own hand of right." And this passage is reproduced in Gerald's book Witchcraft today. If these laws were so ancient and authoritative, why had Gerald never given them to us before? We discussed these matters, realizing that the question had become, by Gerald's own actions, one of confidence in him. And the more we examined the alleged laws, the less confidence we had in either him or them. Life changed dramatically for Doreen in 1964 when both her mother, Edith, and Gerald Gardner died. It was also that year, perhaps due to growing tensions and internal politics emerging within Gardnerianism, that Doreen decided to move on and take up with another tradition. She was initiated into the Clan of Tubal Cain, a coven run by Robert Cochrane. Cochrane claimed to be a hereditary witch and was the founder of the tradition now referred to as the 1734 tradition, a tradition allegedly handed down through his family. According to biographers, Doreen became pretty disillusioned with Cochrane as she began to realize his family lineage was more fiction than fact. In fact, his wife outright dismissed his claims. And because he was openly contemptuous of Gardnerian witches, which bugged her. Whatever her issues, she had real fondness and admiration for Gardner and love of her former coven. The breaking point, though, I think, was Cochrane's addiction. It was colored as an obsession with witches' potions. She left him, and Cochrane died in 1966 in what would appear to have been a ritual suicide. He ingested belladonna leaves, most commonly known as deadly nightshade. After the death of her husband, Casimiro, in April 1972, Doreen began to devote much of her time to writing. Her first book was An ABC of Witchcraft in 1973, followed by Natural Magic in 1975, and Witchcraft for Tomorrow in 1978. These 3 books did much to establish Doreen as an authority on witchcraft and magic. Many of today's leading authors, researchers, and pagans contacted Doreen, and she helped them with knowledge, anecdotes, and memories of leading craft figures. For those more discerning, she made available her large and extensive private library, and by guiding their research and proofreading and editing many of their works. In this way, Doreen helped and contributed to many of today's leading Wiccan titles. One of her powers, one of her characteristics that I love and relate to, was that she was a lifelong researcher and archivist. From as early as 1951, for most of the rest of her life, Doreen kept press cuttings on subjects that interested her. Witchcraft, of course, but also black magic, folklore, superstitions, naturism, sexual liberation, UFOs, ancient sites and civilizations, psychic phenomena, strange abilities, and so on. The cuttings were from a variety of different newspapers and magazines, and I suspect that she must have asked her neighbors to save copies for her to go through. They are a rich source of information for future chroniclers of Doreen's life and interests. That's from her biographer. He also says, John Bellum Payne described her flat to me. It was limited to a single room where she had her bed, a small but ancient rented television, her word processor, not even a computer really, and one armchair. Unfortunately, there was little room for anything else, as the rest of the 15 by 15 foot apartment was taken up with racks of metal shelving, with over 2,000 books on the shelves that she had collected over the years, and which formed the basis of her research. The books were often stacked 3 deep, and the rather cheap shelving bowed in the middle with the weight. If I ever asked Doreen what she knew on a topic, she would say, "Oh yes, John, if you go to that rack over there, second shelf down in the middle, then on the second row back, you will find a book with a red cover. If you turn that to page 187 or maybe 188, you will see that on the second paragraph there is a mention of what you were looking for." She did this so many times that I started to test her on this ability, and she picked me up on this too. I love her curiosity and diligence, and I can picture her house exactly, having been in witch houses that were much the same. It was in the 70s that Doreen spoke out and challenged the British government, who were attempting to pass new legislation against witchcraft. They hadn't really counted for Doreen Valiente. She succeeded in lobbying the Member of Parliament, and in the end, the new laws were never passed. Throughout the last 3 decades of her life, Doreen gave freely of her time and energy, contributed much of her research, knowledge, and experience, not only through writing and poetry, but through her personal appearances and public speaking at events and conventions regularly organized by the Pagan Federation, founded in 1971. In her efforts to provide genuine information on paganism and to counter the many misconceptions about its religion, in 1995 she agreed to become patron of the Center for Pagan Studies, founded by John Bellum Payne, her last high priest and working partner. And it was to the Center for Pagan Studies that Doreen made her last public speech. Doreen's contributions to modern-day witchcraft are immeasurable, and yet she was one of the few early pioneers who shunned publicity. She believed that a certain amount of secrecy on the part of covens should be maintained, and that the future of paganism in the age of Aquarius lies in feminism and green issues associated with the environment. In her last address to the National Conference of the Pagan Federation, held at Fairfield Hall in Croydon, London, on the 22nd of November, 1997, she said, "The initiates of the ancient pagan mysteries were taught to say, 'I am the child of earth and starry heaven, and there is no part of me that is not of the gods.' If we in our own day believe this, then we will not only see it as true of ourselves, but of other people also." Doreen came from folk magic, and in the end seemed to circle back to natural magic, folk magic, improvised personal practice. I love this description of how she would lead circles with her third husband and the great, inspiring love of her life. Doreen and her high priest, Ron Cook, would arrive in Ron's 3-wheeled Reliant Robin, valiantly chugging along at 30 miles an hour until it reached its destination, with Doreen and Ron stopping every few miles to drink strong tea from a thermos flask. It was wonderful for we young coven leaders in our glamorous black velvet robes to see Doreen casting a circle, sky-clad, save for woolen cloak, witchy regalia, and rubber boots. Neither clothed nor naked took on a whole new meaning. But Doreen's outfit epitomized her attitude, at once at one with nature, loving witchiness, but ever practical and never pretentious. Jean Williams remembered how Doreen cast the circle with her broomstick, taking command of the space. She then appeared to grow to immense stature as, broomstick in hand, she summoned the mighty ones to guard the circle. I have never before or since witnessed such natural authority. And I love that at age 62, Doreen decided to try to learn how to drive. It didn't really work out for her, but I relate to that too. And I love that she tried. Mostly, I love the descriptions of how she would improvise. Doreen and the rest of the coven were doing their right for the living earth. Magic lived in the woods and hills and wild places. They worked in the dark, so everything was unscripted. You couldn't read in the dark. You had to act from your spirit and connect to the power of the land, or on a seashore to the power of the ocean. This is the kind of magic that makes sense to me, a practice that emerges joyfully in response to the living moment, the sacred flickering present. I think in the description of these rituals, Doreen came closest to what she really wanted out of her relationship with the land, her biographer writes. Towards the end of her life, she rejected the elaborate intellectual magical systems and traditions into which she had been initiated, and came back to the simple, communing with the old ones. This freedom to simply commune, to believe and to create, along with a feminist, Gaia, and queer-friendly bent to her philosophy, is, I think, the seed of Doreen Valiente's greatest impact. A single line from her Charge of the Goddess became a touchstone for queer craft. All acts of love and pleasure are my rituals. And this is the title of a book by Yvonne Arburo, a workbook and guide for fostering inclusive Wicca and diverse covens. Here's a last set of stories that show Doreen's incredible humility from John Bellempain, founder of the Center for Pagan Studies, describing how he met Doreen. One day in October 1997, we had a phone call from one of our regular attenders who told us that Doreen Valiente had heard about the work we were doing and wondered if she could come along and have a look. Tony is an unsung hero, and for many years he was Doreen's friend and unofficial taxi service, taking her on her weekly shopping trips. He was an animal activist, something Doreen was very keen on. He stayed a close friend right up until the end of her life. We were running an event for Sam Hain, complete with a firework display. Doreen came along, and to be honest, I tried not to meet her. I was not sure of what I would say other than, "I have all your books." I gave a talk during the event in the barn, and I was horrified to see her at the back of the room. I have since likened this to the Pope turning up to a local village church and the priest being as nervous as I was. However, she came up to meet me at the end and said how much she enjoyed the evening and my talk. She asked if it would be okay if she had my phone number. I wrote it down for her, never expecting a call, assuming she was just being polite. A few days later, there was a phone call, and the person on the other end of the line had a soft West Country accent. "My name is Doreen Valiente. I came to your event the other evening. I do hope you remember me." "Of course I do, Mrs. Valiente," I replied. "Well, I've been looking at the work the center has been doing, and I'm very impressed. Would you mind if I got a bit more involved?" I was so shocked, and for the want of something sensible to say, I said, "That would be lovely. What do you think you could do?" "Well," she said, "I'm not too good on my pins these days, but if you sat me at the sink, I could wash the dishes." This was, I felt, a great lesson. Instead, Bellempain asked her to give a talk at the center. She sat in a small armchair on an empty stage. She shared stories and ideas. She asked, "We talk about means of raising power, but what actually is the witch power that is raised?" She saw it as identical with what was variously known as mana, prana, odile, animal magnetism, and orgone energy. And she went on, "Perhaps today, when people's minds are more open, we may begin to study this realm of subtle energies more closely, and perhaps rediscover what really happens when witches gather together to raise the cone of power." Doreen asked what we should do with this power once raised. Whilst acknowledging the craft as a fertility cult, she went on to say, "The idea of fertility is something that goes much deeper than the hope for good crops and increased livestock, and I am sure that it always did. There is a spiritual as well as a material fertility. There is the need for people to be alive and vital and creative. Life is here to be enjoyed, not just endured." John Bellempain would write, "When she was asked to take part in the conference, she had no idea she was going to be the main event of the day. She phoned me the following morning to see what I thought of her talk and genuinely said, 'I thought all those young people wouldn't know who I was. I thought I might be talking in a small room somewhere to 10 or 15 people who would be interested in what old Doreen had to say, but no idea so many. I thought at first they'd come to see someone else. I was so surprised. All those people, John. How did I do?' My instant reply was, 'I think 2,000 people giving you a standing ovation says that you did all right, Doreen.' It was the Pagan Federation's biggest ever event." He commented, "Sometimes the greatest people among us do not realize how much they have done for us all." Doreen's last request was that her poetry be published. She hid worlds in language and left behind a subtle map for seeing what she saw behind the world of form. And so let's close with the poem she wrote originally for her friend, the flamboyant, fraudulent, but still in her eyes magical Robert Cochrane. Let's send this elegy for a dead witch out to the ether with love for ourselves, the versions of ourselves who have worn masks, who have come to tables armed with our shadows, fierce with protection, who have lived like flickering lights and loved and failed and done their best. And let's send it out to ancestors and friends who've gone, but who are with us here in the listening dark. Proud, problematic, patient. And mostly, let's light up a full moon where Valiente said all true magic lies in our mind. And call this elegy out to her, sky-clad in rubber boots, watching the age of Aquarius rise. To think that you are gone over the crest of the hills as the moon passed from her fullness, riding the sky, and the white mare took you with her. To think that we will wait another life to drink the wine from the horns and leap the fire. Farewell from this world, but not from the circle. That place that is between the worlds shall hold return in due time. Nothing is lost. The half of a fruit from the tree of Avalon shall be our reminder. Among the fallen leaves, this life treads underfoot. Let the rain weep. Waken in sunlight from the realms of sleep.
You aren't being a proper woman, therefore you must be a witch. You must be a witch.
Thanks for listening to the Missing Witches podcast. Be sure to come back Wednesday for Witches Found, where we'll hear from a mother-daughter witch duo, Celia and Mileda Jimenez. In the meantime, hit us up at missingwitches@gmail.com or on social media at missingwitches. Blessed be.